And what I've learnt as well from more experienced diviners is how to get nuanced answers, subtle answers out of what seems to be a very simple binary alternative.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. David, thank you so much for joining me on The No Show. I'm really pleased to have you.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So you've been researching in West Africa for over 30 years. Why? What is it about West Africa that has drawn you in and kept you there for so long?
Good question. It started out as being fairly arbitrary, really. At one level, I could have gone anywhere. And so I rolled up very naive to do my doctorate. And the bottom line, I suppose, is that I like the village where I work, and I like the people there. I now have friends there, and I keep going back, well, to catch up, and I suppose to find out what happened next. You know, last time I was there was this argument about what to do about something else, and I'm a inquisitive sort of person, and I want to find out what happened. But of course, I know that will never end. So there's a problem for me.
That's very interesting, because that almost makes you as if you've become part of the community, or you're a member of the community.
Well, I could exaggerate how integrated I am, but to an extent, yes. And there are a lot of people from the village who now live in big cities like Yaoundé or Douala in Cameroon, big cities like Washington, DC. The last time I was in the States, I stopped in Washington, DC to have lunch with a guy who grew up 100 kilometers, 100 meters. His mother's house is 100 meters from the house I live in the village. So I knew him when he was a small child, and there we were in Washington, DC, chatting away in Mambila. Yeah, it was very strange. So my point was that people in the village see me more often than some of these other people from the village who are in other big cities, just because I'm able to travel, have been able to travel more often.
It's fascinating, because there's this element of, like, as an anthropologist, in much of your work, from what I understand, is ethnographic, which means that you fundamentally embed yourself and just look and watch and observe. Now, from a storytelling perspective, how rich is it as an experience?
Very. I mean, it's challenging. What I'm fascinated by, I suppose, are the narratives that they give to their lives. And so one of the weirdnesses, again, of lockdown was that, partly to keep my language skills going, I ended up listening to recordings I had made 20 years before, and was able to put some pieces together. So there was a ritual, 20 years ago, it's scary, in which one of the participants was late, And when she arrived, she was really, really cross. And the day after, I went round to her house and said, you know, I really didn't understand what all that shouting was about. Can you explain it to me? And she did. And I was able to connect that to other stories I've been told. And it was all about a dispute about who was going to be a hamlet head. So in that tiny hamlet, a big deal, even from the rest of the village, not very big deal, but she was a ritual leader and kind of was brought in to arbitrate. And so as an ethnographer, in a sense, what I'm doing is listening to all the gossip and writing it down and trying to make sense of it. And that was a kind of nice encapsulation of it, that when I was actually present, I really didn't understand what was going on, but because I talk to people and people talk to me, you know, and I write things down, I can make sense of it perhaps after the event.
So is it in West Africa that you discovered divination?
Yeah. I wasn't actually interested in it until I had been there, because it's a big deal in the village, and ultimately it's a big deal in the country, because witchcraft is a part of, is a named offence in the Cameroonian Penal Code, Article 237 from memory. And if you are accusing someone of witchcraft, then divination is part of the evidence for either the prosecution or the defense. And so ultimately people can be sent to jail for 20 years on the basis of the results of divination. Now that's just the kind of top of the pyramid, as you like, of what happens with divination. And, you know, a lot of the decisions, a lot of the consultations are far more mundane and driven actually by questions about illness. Is this, how should I treat my a particular illness or an illness of a child? But what first brought it to my attention was because I was working on disputes in the village court. And, you know, I followed a dispute from the village up through the criminal system.
And so does that not make divination as a practice or as I suppose a career, does that not make it precarious for people practicing over there?
Not for the diviners. Diviners don't tend to get accused of witchcraft themselves. So, you know, they'd say we are the diagnosticians, if that's a proper word. You know, I'm just answering the questions that are put to me. I happen to have these skills. I know these techniques, which will elucidate what they would say. It will give you answers. Yeah.
I find it very interesting because you referred to earlier on. You mentioned that you've become a diviner, and this is presumably because of, you know, so many years of exposure to it. So tell me what it is that you do as a diviner.
Well, the main technique I use, I actually have learned 3 techniques. The only one I really practice when I'm there, and even then, I generally just I don't practice on my own. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But the main one I do is, well, it's known as spider divination. And what you do is, there's a very big spider, I mean, that sort of size, a sort of tarantula, which lives in a hole in the ground. And what you do is you cover it over and you put leaf cards over the hole and a stick and a stone, and you associate different options with the stick and the stone, and you kind of tap and ask, what you ask your questions and say, well, a test question is, am I here alone? If I am, choose the stick. If I'm here with other people, choose the stone. You go away, wait for half an hour or something, come back. The spider has come out of its hole, disturb the cards, and you read whether the cards are more on the stick or more on the stone. And it sounds very simple, but there are all sorts of options which allow for complexity. And what I've learned as well from more experienced diviners is how to get nuanced answers, subtle answers out of what seems to be a very simple binary alternative.
And who would typically come to see a diviner? I know you mentioned a lot of stuff surrounding sickness, but who would typically come?
I have counted, I have done some counts, and about half of it is about sickness. And then there's people are asking about investment choices. So there are people who say, I'm thinking of opening a shop, I'm thinking of buying a motorcycle to be a motorcycle taxi. Is this a good idea? People who are saying, I'm thinking about building a house. Oh, and then marriage. I'm considering marrying this person. Is that a good idea?
It's something that, from what I understand, or from what I've seen, it's something that is very common across Africa and the Middle East and
across the world.
Yeah, across the world. I guess it's just different tools for different communities, and so within these communities, is this sort of spider method is this a popular one, or is it just unique to that village that you were in?
No, it's spread throughout the southern half of Cameroon. There are variations on this, so it's been written about in different groups, and some of the cards have been published, but not for a long time. So there is a book called Spider Divination in the British Cameroons, which, as you can tell from its title, goes back to colonial days. But sorry, the thing to emphasize is that in the village, there are 5, 6, 7 different sorts of divination practiced by different people. Spider divination is seen as the most reliable, the only one which you can take seriously enough to use in court. The others, well, the spider diviners dismiss the others as just being games.
Okay.
Quite interesting. But the sort of thing that might happen is that someone might use one of the lesser regarded forms, get an answer, and then take that answer to spider divination, as it were, for confirmation.
And you mentioned that they would, the consultation would then be used in court. How does that work?
Well, this is only when oh no, it's not. Sorry, I was about to say it is only for accusations of witchcraft, but it is also used for accusations of theft, actually. So, but witchcraft, someone is accused of causing an illness through supernatural means. They deny it. The chief of the village would send a diviner, someone out to go and do divination. Again, never done on their own, because in this sort of thing you need witnesses of what the result is. And the key thing there would be that they ask the same question several times of several different spiders.
Okay.
And they're very empirical about this. They say sometimes a spider just always throws the cards the same way. They're obviously having a bad day. Forget it. We'll go and ask a different one. So they test, and you can ask the same question and swap the stick and the stone over, just to check that it is actually, in their terms, actually answering the question being put. And so with witchcraft accusations, you do all that and you do it in parallel simultaneously. And if they all say the same thing, you come back to court and you report and say, you know, we've done all this, and all the answers say, yes, this person is guilty, or yes, this person is innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, they are, in that sense, they are witnesses of divination, and they can be seen as being for the defense or the prosecution. And so they have to be, the diviners have to be not involved in the actual case.
Is there anything mystical about this spider that has made these communities look at the spider as you know, a decision maker essentially?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. In other groups with very similar practices, there are particular accounts, particular myths, really, about why the spiders have this knowledge. And in Mambila, the group I work with, they have a myth that explains why you have to do this procedure, why the spider no longer talks with its mouth.
Okay.
But the myth does not explain why it has its knowledge in the first place.
Okay.
Which is a bit weird. But there is a clue in the myth about why it doesn't talk, which is it goes underground and it goes to a village of the dead. And so and again, if you look at the mythologies from further south, there is an idea that the ancestors live on and they have their own villages underground. The spiders live in a hole. And so they go into the idea is that they go into their hole and go deep underground and find the ancestors and ask them, and that's the source of their knowledge.
And presumably then the ancestor is looked at as all-knowing.
Yeah, except I have problems with this because again, in the particular group where I work, compared to other groups in Cameroon, they are far less interested in the dead and ancestors than these other groups. And so I always hesitate. I don't like talking about ancestors.
Yeah.
Really, because it's not very formalized, is all I'd say. In a lot of groups, your ancestor, your something like your great-great-grandfather is different from my great-great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And you can have contact through ritual with your great-great-grandfather. I can have contact with mine, but between the two, there's no connection.
Yeah.
Mambila isn't as linear as that. So I don't think talking about ancestors quite captures. So it's more a general reverence for the dead.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. Because obviously not everything is translatable, and you can't really take a cultural practice. Like I can name you any one of all sorts of cultural practices that exist in Iraq. If I translate it to you, you sound very rigid and arbitrary. But I mean, that's the beauty of randomness in the world. So you've spent a lot of time in West Africa. Now, one of the things that you've also done is worked with photographers from West Africa, which is very interesting because obviously there was, as you mentioned before the recording, there was historically this idea of the white man looking at observing black bodies and black images, but you're not looking at it that way.
No, I mean, because the photographers I am working with are themselves Cameroonians, and I mean, the complication is that from the 1950s, in the run-up to independence, one of the drivers for photography in Cameroon was the colonial requirement to have an identity card photograph on an ID card. And so, although it's not a thing about the colonial gaze and kind of, you know, white people looking at black people, the tasks of photography in Cameroon were driven by a very colonial agenda. But one of the things I've been looking at is how those agendas in photography have been subverted. So there's photographs, I mean, particularly, actually, this goes back to what we've just been talking about, and reverence for the dead. Often for very old people, the only surviving photograph is an identity card photograph. And post-mortem, I've got loads of instances of this in the archives that I've helped work on. Post-mortem, the photograph is torn off the identity card, taken back to the photographer, re-photographed and enlarged. And so people have enlargements, have photos on their walls of their parents, their grandparents, that actually come from identity cards, ultimately.
It's very interesting because that's very, very similar to the story in Iraq, which is, you know, if you go into a traditional house in the South, you'll find like a big picture of the granddad or, you know, the head of the household. And those pictures all have the same pose, which was, you know, an ID card once upon a time. And so it's really fascinating because, you know, there's an evolution in it. It starts off as a colonized sort of way of thinking about photography, but of course they adopt it and then they change it and it becomes their own identity. Tell us a bit more about, you know, how things change for photography in West Africa.
Well, one of the nice, bad word perhaps, unintended consequences of the requirement of identity card photography was that it was quite cheap. It had to be, because people had to be able to afford it. And there were so many people coming through, you get economies of scale. And so the sorts of things that would happen is someone would come in, possibly with some friends, to get ID card photos done. And while they were there, they would do something else. So you get group photographs.
Okay.
You get people fooling around. You know, you get, there are some wonderful ones of people wearing Stetson hats and being cowboys. And sometimes, and you can see this in the archives because it's things, in some cases, it's adjacent negatives, or the negatives have got scattered, but you can realize, you see people changing clothes, and so they've actually brought changes of clothes with them so that they have a range of different things in on the same visit to the photographer. There's a wonderful one of a man wearing a suit and then wearing traditional robes.
Okay.
So he wanted to be portrayed both as a modern kind of, you know, member of the world elite and as a serious traditionalist. But if you look at his feet, he's got the same shoes on.
Okay. And is there an element of sort of like social mobility or in this, like people wanting to perceive themselves, or people wanting others to perceive themselves as, you know, a bit more, you know, a bit more I guess upmarket?
Yeah, I mean, so photographers were invited out from the studios to take photos outside, and a very common thing, a common instance would be someone opening a shop.
Mm-hmm.
There's a nice set of photographs from the Jacques Toussaint archive of him at the opening of a tailor's shop.
Mm-hmm.
And then people would come with, and they display certificates. Unfortunately, the quality of the photos is not quite good enough that I can read what the certificates are for, but they are holding them up.
Mm-hmm.
And you get groups outside outside of the staff at hospitals and dispensaries. You get people outside state offices and groups of bureaucrats, as it were. So yes, your question is very good. It's taking a pride in social mobility.
What is there anything that has struck you from these observing so many photos, and not just photos from photographers, but you've actually gone into people's houses and looked at their collections. So is
Mm-hmm.
there any key themes or key ideas that have struck you the most?
Well, the thing about the albums, yeah, okay. So the albums are now seen, like black and white photography, as being old and quaint. Nobody, of course, now has an album. They're all just held on a mobile phone. So I've looked at albums from typically the 70s, yeah, late 60s, 70s, early 80s is the most of the ones that I've seen. And so those are the relatively early years of independence.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've been struck by is how mobile people were.
Mm-hmm.
That although these albums are in relatively small towns, villages, and Toussaint, a medium-sized town, but there are photographs from all over the place. People were going to the big cities and celebrating being in the big cities by having a photograph taken and then coming back, or sending the photograph. And so the albums exemplify, to my mind, a dynamism and a fluidity that the kind of stereotypes of small traditional villages are at tension with.
Mm-hmm. And there is this this I guess false assumption that these villages are secluded, they're not connected with the wider world, eh, they're self-sufficient, or not, they don't have that connectivity that we might think of in a big city, coming from a big city in the UK. But you're saying that's not the case. You're saying that people actually, people communicated through these pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now of course it's all WhatsApp and text messages. And just before we came on air, I was getting text messages from Cameroon. But it's, I suppose, the message the bigger picture I get is it's always been like that. 60s, 70s, 80s photographs, go back a step before that, it was letters. I have colleagues working on, letters sent in Nigeria from the 1930s and before. And then if you want to take the really big picture, you get into all this work that's now being done by historians about how Europe was connected by letters.
Mm-hmm.
You get all those networks between businesses, you get all those networks of early scientists. And of course different religious groups. And there are parallels to those sorts of networks in West Africa, is what I'd say.
Tell me more about the poses in these pictures that you have seen sort of be recurring as it be.
Okay, this is a very common one, a kind of thinking pose.
Okay.
You know, you put your hand to your chin, and the really intriguing thing about that is not only do you see that pose across loads of photographers, so it's not specific to anyone, it's clearly kind of coming from the people coming into the studio, but also if you go to the Museum of Mankind, which doesn't exist anymore, British Museum Africa Gallery, or you know, Musée Quai Branly in Paris, wherever, there are wooden sculptures from Cameroon with the same pose. So I think that maybe the idea of how do you convey thinking about someone absent is long established from the statuary, and that somehow comes into the consciousness of the clients. How do you show that you're a serious person, that you're in some cases I know definitely, because I've talked to the people, that they do that pose in a photograph that they are sending to someone else who's no longer in the village. So it means I'm thinking of you.
Okay, and there's an element of introspection there, because you're looking at you're worried about how you look for yourself, but not in terms of anything material, but in terms of thought. And now that's contrary to, like, you know, showing your watch, which might have some capitalistic influences.
Definitely. And you know, you can't, I'm not sure if I've actually got both together. I don't think I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are these ones which are conceptual, let me put it like that, and there are others which are material. But and then there are some utterly mad ones. I've got on my pile to try and find out about the next time I can go back to Cameroon is about 3 or 4 of a group of young men. There must be about 10 people crammed into the studio, and they're clearly fooling around. But one of them, he's got his head on his hands, and I'm wondering if it's almost a stag night. You know, it's someone that it could be. This is my dilemma. One way of reading it is this is one man and his mates, and he's about to go and do something. It could be getting married, it could be joining the army, and what he's portraying in a jokey way is, have I done the right thing? And I hope I can track down somebody in the photograph who can put me right, because at the moment it's all speculation.
So you've been productive over lockdown, presumably more productive than most of us. And you've written a theory book. And it's what I really like about what you've done is you don't push a narrative that this theory is the line of thinking that we must follow, or, you know, we should give it more depth. You've essentially given us theory as a toolkit.
Yeah, and it's called an anthropological toolkit. This comes out of working with research students as they start their research careers, and I have got worried about their relationships to theory, that they try and kind of cram everything into a single lens. And what I find more helpful is being, more fleet-footed and kind of jumping between perspectives and using multiple perspectives to help illuminate what's going on.
It's a very interesting way of thinking because, you know, typically we cluster our thoughts based on ideas that we get. This is very true of economics, of politics, of, you know, all sorts of things. Now, when you present something in this way, what you're doing is you're really giving credence to everyone involved in the field and saying, actually, you shouldn't be so rigid and dogmatic in your thought. There should be a room for maneuver.
Radical eclecticism, I can call it.
I like that a lot, radical eclecticism. And so who is the theory book, is that written for students or is it written for researchers in particular?
I guess the hope is it's both, actually. It's certainly, the hope is it's approachable and helpful for quite a wide range of disciplines, although it says an anthropological toolkit in the title. I hope it will be helpful across a wide range of social science disciplines. And yeah, I would have thought undergraduates would find it helpful as well as research students, but it was working with research students that kind of prompted me to write it.
Where can people find you online and interact with the work that you've done, whether it's, you know, the photography, whether it's the years of work on divination?
Right. Photography. Well, I suppose one place to start is simply my departmental page, because that has links to a variety of different online resources. But so the photography, there's the Fowler Museum exhibition in UCLA at the moment. The main archive of Jacques Toussaint is at the British Library. That's the digital archive with copies in the Cameroon National Archives. Online divination, there's a project with Thomas Saraceno, the Berlin-based artist, which is about to go live, where we are coordinating with diviners in Cameroon, and I'll send you a link to that. And what else? The book is going to be published by Berghahn in 2022.
These seem like extremely fascinating things, especially the exhibition and the photography is something that I'd really be interested in seeing myself. So once again, thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome.
I've had a really interesting conversation with you and hope to have you on sometime soon.
Okay, thanks again then.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.